Hello crafty friends, welcome to day 11 of Die Cut December 2025. Today the random number generator chose number 45 and that corresponded to gifts. So I got out all my party celebration dies and discovered I only had two present type dies. A large stacked aperture present die and a teeny tiny little die. I also grabbed some party popper sprinkles, but I don't end up using those. I don't use the teeny tiny present die either. Because I decided after many attempts to cut this large present die to just stick with simple today, I've decided that I hate this die, that I never want to use this die again. I'm probably going to charity shop it and hope someone else has more luck with it than I do, because I've tried to use it in a couple of videos and it's always gone wrong. So yes, I am going to pass this die on to someone else who might love it. So for my first attempt at cutting this die, I wanted to cut the aperture into the front of my card blank and then put some colour behind it. That was my plan. So I used my T-square ruler and my rule of thirds acetate grid to line up my present die down in the bottom left-hand corner of my card front. I then put some post-it tape on top to hold it in place and ran it through my die cutting machine. Some of the bits die cut nicely, but most of them didn't, and as I was trying to finagle them out of their little holes, I just made a right old mess. So I did attempt number 2, which simply involved putting the die back on the card front, locking it into the holes that it had already cut and running it through my die cutting machine. And that didn't work either. It didn't cut through in lots of places and my card front ended up even more mangled. For attempt number 3, I used a fresh card blank and added a small cardboard shim over the die, so that a little bit of extra pressure would be applied to the die, but that didn't work either. It still didn't cut all the way through in some areas. So for attempt number 4, I thought I would just get my craft knife and try and cut along the edges of the apertures just to get through the little bits that hadn't cut properly. And I was very gentle, but all the little bits in between the apertures were really delicate and I just tore those as I was trying to cut around them. So I abandoned the idea of cutting through the front of my card blank and decided to do attempt number 5 and cut through a piece of card which I could then cut down. And instead of using my Cuttlebug, I used my Gemini Mini, and that actually worked. I guess it just applied the right amount of pressure for this particular die. So once I'd poked out all the little bits from my aperture, I chose a banner die and die cut my presents into a banner shape, which I was happy with. It wasn't my original idea, but it's what I ended up with. I then took a card blank and masked off around where my banner was going to go, because I wanted to blend some inks on my card blank so that they would show through the apertures, the present apertures. For my inks, I decided to go with some bluey greens because I wanted to heat emboss on top of them in gold, and I thought that would create a nice contrast of colours. So I started by blending salvage patina over most of the unmasked area of the card, and I brought in my banner just to make sure I'd inked high enough up. I also marked with a pencil on the masking paper where each present was, so that I could blend the next colour up to the top of the second present, the middle present, and the third colour up to the top of the bottom present. You'll see what I mean as we go on. For my second colour, I used peacock feathers, which is a kind of darker, more saturated version of salvage patina. And then for my bottom colour, my third colour, I used broken china. I then gave them a bit of a buff with a microfiber cloth to smooth out the blend. I dried them with my hairdryer, gave them a dusting with some talcum powder to remove any moisture, static or oily fingerprints. I then used an outline flower die to stamp in embossing ink over my ink blended area, and I sprinkled on some gold embossing powder from Wow and heated it with my heat tool to get that lovely gold embossed floral image. Once the embossing was all cooled and set, I removed the masking paper and added some 1mm deep foam tape to the back of my banner so that when I stuck it on the card it would have a little bit of lift, and that would create a nice sort of 3D drop shadow effect when looking at the card at different angles. So once I'd removed the release paper, I put my banner on my card, lining it up over the colourful area. But I didn't like the proportions. I don't think I got the presents in quite the right place on the banner. So I decided to abandon ship and chop my card blank down into a square panel. I then placed this on another piece of card and trimmed it out with my guillotine to give it a little white border all the way around the outside. And I then placed this in the middle of a square card blank. It's about 5 3/4 inches by 5 3/4 inches. Once that was stuck down, I figured out where the intersection of the top third line was and the right hand side third line, and made a little pencil mark because that was where I wanted to put my sentiment. I put the card in my stamp positioner and added a happy birthday sentiment over that little pencil mark that I just made. I got it nice and straight with my set square, picked it up with my door, inked it up with embossing ink and did the sprinkle and heating again. And I just about had enough when I finished this card, so I decided not to do any further embellishments. I actually really liked the way it turned out, but it was a beast to get there. So as I say, this die is definitely going to the charity shop. I think I've had my use out of it, and someone else can give it a go. Right, I hope you've enjoyed today's video. I hope it's given you a smile or two, and I hope to see you back here tomorrow for the next day of Die Cut December. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.